I'd like to thank you for joining us in our study in the book of 1 Corinthians. Today we're in 1 Corinthians, the first chapter, starting with verse number 17. Now the Apostle Paul is talking about how he ministered to the Corinthians. And I think this is very important because he's laying a groundwork, he's laying a foundation in which he's going to use to bring correction into this church in Corinth. And in verse number 17, the Apostle Paul says this. Again, 1 Corinthians, the first chapter, verse number 17. For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not in cleverness of speech, so that the cross of Christ would not be made void. What's the Apostle Paul doing? The Apostle Paul is telling the Corinthians why he came. He said, Christ did not send me. You know, the Apostle Paul didn't just go wherever he wanted. He didn't just run around the world going, oh, let me see. I kind of like that, and I kind of like, no. Paul is going where the Spirit of God, where Christ sends him. And then he says, that Christ did not send me to baptize. Now, what does that tell us? Paul knew his purpose. He knew what he was doing. He knew what he was sent to do. He was sent to do one thing, and that was to preach Christ Jesus, to preach the gospel to the Corinthians. So he says, I wasn't sent to baptize, and we talked about who Paul baptized and who he did not baptize. And in the city of Corinth, he baptized very few people. But Paul knew what he was sent to do. He was single-minded on what he was sent to do. He was not sent to go and have a baptismal service. No, he was sent to preach the gospel. He was sent to preach the good news, to preach it, to proclaim it, to speak it out. Actually, the Greek says to cry it out, to unloose a burden that was on the inside of us. That's all in the Greek understanding of this word. To cry it out, to loose this burden of preaching the gospel to the Corinthians. So Paul was single-minded. I have come not to baptize, but I've come to preach the gospel. By the way, that's not to minimize baptism. I believe every Christian needs to be baptized by immersion in water. If you haven't been, you need to be. Find a pastor that will baptize you. Find any believer that will baptize you, actually, and get baptized in water. Then he goes on in verse number 17. Not in cleverness of speech. How did he preach the gospel? Did he sit there on Saturday night thinking, now how can I be clever in how I present this? Now, how can I've taken homiletics, which is the study of preaching, and it was a great class with a wonderful professor. But you know what? I know of preachers that are more concerned on how they present the gospel than presenting the gospel itself. So Paul said, not in cleverness of speech, not thinking about, not gnawing over this thing all the time. How can I present this? How will the people react to me and all that? No, Paul just went in and simply preached the gospel. Now notice what he says next. So that the cross of Christ would not be made void. You see, I think that some of the preaching that goes on today, they're so concentrated on being clever, so concentrated on how they're presenting their speech, their proclamation. And really what happens is when cleverness of speech overrules the preaching of the gospel. What happens? The Apostle Paul says this: the cross of Christ would not be made void. Wow. You see, anytime that we emphasize something more than the gospel, this is the tragedy that happens. The cross of Christ is made void. The word void, it actually means to be of no effect. You know, we as preachers, now I've been a preacher for 48 years, but this is something that just burns in my heart. We need to preach the gospel. I remember when I was graduating from Bible college, and our commencement speaker was a wonderful, wonderful man of God named C.M. Ward. And he ended his speech, and when he did, it just burned on the inside of me. But he ended his speech just yelling out, "Preach the word! Preach the word! Preach the word!" Brothers and sisters, we need to get back to proclaiming the gospel. We need to get back to proclaiming the cross of Christ, and we're going to get into that right now. Because in verse number 18, the Apostle Paul says this: "For the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing." Now, let's paint a picture here. Here, the preacher is thinking about how to be clever, how to act like he's smart. And here he is acting like he's smart, but the Apostle Paul says, "For the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing." Now, though it says the word of the cross, it didn't say the cross. Now, I've heard preachers say, well, the cross, to the unbeliever, the cross is foolishness. No, he's talking about the gospel of the cross. The word logos means the teaching of the cross. You see, to an unbeliever, the teaching of the cross is absolute foolishness. That's what Paul is saying. To the perishing, it is absolute foolishness to preach the cross, to talk about and to teach about the cross. Let me ask you a question, and it's something for you to think about. When was the last time your pastor taught on the cross? When was the last time he talked about redemption? Or is he just up there giving you some clever speech that he got out of a book of sermons? Ooh, I'm getting some people upset at me now. When was the last time that he preached the cross? We need to get back to the basics. We need to get back to the preaching of the cross. We need to get back to the teaching of the cross. And then the Apostle Paul goes on in verse number 18, and he says, "But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God." It is the power of God. Now, the word power there is the Greek word dunamis. And it really means the power to achieve something, the power to change something. The preaching of the cross, the teaching of the cross. My time is up for today. We're going to pick up in verse number 19 tomorrow. Make sure that you tune in because it's all connected. Thank you for watching.